Hi everyone, my name is David and I'm 37. We're all dropped into this life at different starting points on our spiritual journey, and we're all faced with the same questions. Questions like, how did we get here? And what happens when we die? Why are we here? I love talking about these questions with as many different people as I can. After I'm done sharing my journey so far, there may be some who have questions or concerns. Some people from the church that I grew up in may even be angry with me for how open I'm being about my journey. So I'm starting a podcast, and I want to announce that right now. It's called Fundamental Questions of Being. I'm going to be asking two questions. What do you believe happens when we die? And what is life to you? What is the meaning of life to you? And my hope with that is just to listen and get as many different perspectives as I can, and also to give an outlet for someone to ask any questions of me if they want to, of anything I've said here today or otherwise. I'm not trying to trap anyone with this podcast or prove that I'm superior in any way. Quite the opposite. I'm approaching this whole thing very humbly. I do not have all the answers. I'm just a seeker of truth, and I started in one spot, and now I'm in a different spot, and I just want to share that journey so far, and maybe that'll change tomorrow. I don't know. So, as I was preparing for this, someone that I admire recently asked me a question that sort of stopped me in my tracks. They asked it in a somewhat accusatory tone, and the question was, what makes your story so special? I didn't really have an answer for that, and now I do, and it's this. I started, what prompted this, what motivated me was the death of my childhood friend, and relating to the very hard position that he was in, I felt that parts of his story and my story. Now, my story is not his story, and there are many parts of my story that won't relate with his story, and so I want to make that clear as well. His story prompted me to be more open and honest about mine, in hopes that if even one thing I share today helps even one person feel less alone and trapped, and maybe saves a life, then this is all worth it. So that's why this is special to me, is I want to help people, and also I want to stumble towards a greater version of the truth. And I feel like the best way to get there is to search. And to ask questions of the people around me. I do want to warn you before I get into this that I think it's appropriate that I give a parental advisory to this video. I'm not going to be swearing, or at least I'm not going to try to or anything, but I will be referencing things like sex, and I'll be just giving a high-level reference to some of my experiences with mind-altering substances. Although I will say that because I don't want that to taint or be the focus of my message today, I'm just going to leave it vague in this video, and then follow up with another video before I release my next song, 2 songs from now, called Keep the Kid. So in that video, I'll share more specifics about my past experiences with mind-altering substances. But if you are under the age of 18, I recommend that you ask your parents first, and parents, that you watch this before allowing your children to watch it. The point of this video is to be as raw and unfiltered as possible. Originally, I wasn't going to write anything down, and I was just going to speak. But the danger with that is I thought I'll probably forget something or lose my focus and get sidetracked. So I do have some notes here that I'm reading from, and it's basically an outline to help me stay on track. I'm going to do my best with being as honest as I can about my own life, and to stick to telling my story. I will say that because there have been a couple key moments in my life that involved other people in my story, I do have to briefly include those people. I'm going to try my very best to stay away from telling their story and stick to only the things that apply to mine. So, here we go. Starting out, I really had nothing to complain about. I'm from a really cool town called Fond du Lac in Wisconsin in the United States. The translation for Fond du Lac is, I've heard it two ways, either first on the lake or foot of the lake, and that's because there's Lake Winnebago, it's called, is at the top of our town. And so Fond du Lac is right here at the bottom of the lake and leading up to the lake. And the thing that I always liked is there's a lighthouse at one of the northernmost parts of the city, so it was always easy for me as a kid to visualize where north was and just to think about, I felt like if you had problems with directions, Fond du Lac would help you a little bit. So I always appreciated that. I was born on 6/30 into a middle-class family, a really awesome family. I'm the third son and sixth child of two awesome parents who are still married and just celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. I love my mom and dad and my brother and sisters so much. I was very blessed to have an awesome family. I was raised Christian. Today, both my other brothers are pastors. My dad volunteers and does jail ministry. I have one sister who teaches in a Christian day elementary school, and another who is married to a Christian day school teacher and who works at a Christian day school. I was sent to this school when I was in kindergarten and taught from the Bible every day. I was always kind of weird in that I've just always really loved to sing. One of the memories that I had forgotten about that my kindergarten teacher recently reminded me of is we used to have to recite hymns in the front of class to our teacher, and everybody else would just speak theirs, and I'd go up and belt them out singing in front of the whole class. I've always loved singing so much. One thing that I remembered early on in my life was when we would have Bible class at school. Whenever we'd get to the book of Revelation, we'd just kind of skim through it. And it always seemed like our teachers would talk about it in a way where there's a lot of different interpretations that can be taken there. It almost seemed like we never really even went there. We went there a couple times in grade school, but more so as I became an adult and we had Bible classes and things. But Revelation is kind of a weird book in the Bible because it's coded in symbolism. God is revealing something to John, and John's writing it down, and he uses all of these numbers to symbolize different things. And so he's giving these prophecies of the end times, but it's not as clearly stated in other books of the Bible as in other books of the Bible. So I was always fascinated by the book of Revelation and the symbolism attributed to the numbers there. Things like 6 being the number for incompleteness, or 666 being the number for the mark of the beast, it says in Revelation. The number 7 it attributes to holiness, or being the number for Christ, or 777 is completeness. The number 12 is also a number for completeness. The number 7 is God blessed the seventh day by making it holy when he created a 7-day week in creation according to the book of Genesis. We have a 12-month year and 2 12-hour cycles in our day. The number 3 is attributed to the Trinity. So there are other symbolisms there, but the reason I'm sharing that is it plays a part in my story later on, and I wanted to start here to show that the reason I even thought about numbers ever in my life is not because I'm weird and obsessed with numbers, but because I was taught about Revelation when I was a child. I remember also one thing that was kind of a constant in my life that I remembered, because I was the youngest of 6 kids and we were all spaced out quite a bit. I didn't really grow up with too many of them except for my next oldest sister, who was 4 years older than me. And So I remember just kind of always wanting to fit in and sort of wishing that I could have been closer to my siblings as I was growing up. I became much closer with them as in my adult life, but I just remembered kind of always not really feeling like I fit in too much. I'm going to try to be really honest about sins that I've committed throughout my life. I obviously won't get to them all, and in the interest of time, I'm basically giving highlights of my story and lowlights. But one thing from my childhood that I do remember that I wanted to just be open about is I remember, I think it was even in like second or third grade, I'm not sure. It might have been a little bit later than that, but I remember stealing change from my dad's change jar, and I would go and buy sports cards. I thought that would make me cooler, and so I went and stole from my dad to go and get baseball cards or football cards or whatever. Let's see. When I was in third grade, this is kind of like where my life really changed. When I was in third grade and 7 years old, I actually want to give another warning here because if anyone has ever been sexually abused, I have not been sexually abused, but what I'm about to say might be very troubling for someone who has experienced sexual abuse. And so you may want to skip past this part a little bit. But that being said, so what happened to me in third grade when I was 7 years old is I was playing at my neighbor friend's house, and their parents were gone for the day. And so they were being babysat by their uncle, but he was not babysitting. He was just doing his own thing. And I went over to play, and we went up into their parents' room, and they had found their parents' pornography stash. And there was this video that was playing as soon as I walked into the room. And forgive me, but I just have to give at least a little bit of a visual of what I saw as a third grader that changed my life. So in this video, there were 6 men and 1 woman. And I'm just going to say that it wasn't loving a sexual encounter. It was abuse. And I had not even learned about sex yet. This was the first time I was seeing anything about it, and I was seeing the most perverse form of it. To me, sexual abuse is probably like the worst abuse that you can be a victim of or a perpetrator of, because you're using your body to abuse another person's body. And so that had a profoundly negative impact on me. I instantly developed a distrust for authority. One of the things that happened very recently after is I had a nightmare that, and this was something I really couldn't share with people for a long time because I was so terrified by it. But I had a nightmare that I was in a lake of fire, and there were 2 platforms. I was standing on one, and Satan was on the other one laughing at me. As a third grader, I started to feel cursed. And what I mean by that is I also started getting panic attacks about eternity. It would often happen in the middle of the night. I'd start thinking about how I believed at that time that we would live forever, that when we die, that Christ Jesus will raise us to life. And when I would try to conceptualize forever, it was terrifying to me, to the point where I would scream crying to my parents' room in the middle of the night, and they didn't know what to do for me. It's a weird thing to be afraid of living forever. I've since put it together that it's because I was conceptualizing forever within the understanding of this world or the confines of this world, and to think about evil lasting forever is a horrifying thought. So I was introduced to one of the worst evils that there can be, and then I associated that with eternal life, and it was terrifying to me. The other thing that made me feel cursed is I mentioned how in the book of Revelation that there's a number 666 attributed as the mark of the beast, or for Satan. And I started to realize or put together that I'm the sixth child of my parents, and that I was born in the 6th month, not just the 6th month, but 630, the last day of the 6th month, like the closest you can get to 7 without being there. And my favorite color has always been indigo, which is the 6th color in the rainbow. And these are all dumb things, and you can say they mean nothing. But for me, after I experienced that as a child, and with my religious upbringing, I started to put those things together and feel like I was marked with the mark of the beast. It's like I could lie and say that my favorite color was a different color, but I would be lying because I really love indigo. I've always been drawn to the complexity of it. It's different than the other colors. It's kind of like two colors mixed together, and I always loved that and just think it's a pretty color. So anyway, this really, it's like I had faith in Jesus and I believed that, but I also had this nagging uneasiness inside of me, and it stemmed from this experience. It also made me start asking questions that I hadn't really asked before, some that I started out with, but others like, why did God allow Satan into his perfect garden when he could have walled it off and kept Adam and Eve protected? I never really understood that, and so I started wanting to know the answer to that. Another question was, I remember thinking, I was born into a Christian family, but what about a little boy or girl who's born into a Buddhist family or a Catholic family or a Jewish family or an atheist family or whatever? How do I know I'm right, and how do they know they're wrong? You know what I'm saying? Like, we all start at different points. So we all have to own our faith for ourselves. The other question that I had is, why won't we sin anymore when we get to heaven? Why will we now? Why do we now? But it says, one term that I had heard growing up at the school I went to was, will be confirmed in our holiness. And I never understood that either. So it sent me off on a journey to see if there were answers to those questions. And in the Bible, it says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. I took that to mean, hey, maybe if I dig into the Bible, I'll find these answers. High school. When I got to high school, I kind of kept people at arm's length, and I tried to get along with everyone, but I didn't really want anyone to get too close because I felt like guilty and ashamed from what I had experienced with the pornography as a kid. And it's, again, you can say like no big deal or whatever, but I'm just saying that for me it was, for whatever reason. And so in high school, I tried to get involved in as many different things as possible. I played football and soccer and ran track for a while. I got really, really heavily involved into music, and I was blessed with an awesome choir director and teacher who introduced me to a little bit of music theory, and so I started being able to write a little bit, and I was in the traveling choir and got to sing. I met my future wife in high school. She and I were high school sweethearts. We were interested in a lot of the same things. She loved dance and I loved music, and so that kind of went together, and we dated for several years, and then eventually did get married after high school. Before I get to that, I hadn't tried any mind-altering substances until I was 17 years old, and I graduated high school when I was 17. I turned 18 in the summer after, and that was the first time that I tried alcohol or marijuana, and those are the only substances that I'm going to list specifically today. Like I said, I will give very specific details about my experiences in the past with substances, but I don't want that to be the focus of this message here today. I do want to talk about these two because I have never liked alcohol. The first experience I had with it when I was 17, I did not like how out of control it made me feel. I blacked out and was kind of on autopilot and was puking everywhere, and It was never something that I was drawn to ever again. With marijuana, it was different. The first time that I tried that was with two friends that I trusted very much, and we all did it together, and they were able to take it and leave it. But with me, the first time that I got high or was under the influence of marijuana, it felt like I had found a new friend. And what I mean by that is I'd had this nagging inside of me that my brain was constantly churning, and I was still having panic attacks about eternity quite frequently, at least 4 or 5 times a year, if not more than that. And when I would have these, they would shut me down for like 10 minutes. I'd want to run as far and fast as I could, and it felt like I was falling into a black abyss that was never ending. So they were very, very, very traumatizing for me. So when I was under the influence of marijuana, it was like it kind of dumbed me down to one thought and shut my brain off and gave me like a momentary escape or peace from that. And so I was really drawn to that. I am not condoning the use of any mind-altering substances. I want to say right now that I much prefer myself when I'm not on them. I am sober today, and that's all that matters. I'm much more clear and focused and motivated and have more energy when I'm clean and clear. After I graduated high school, I went to college called Martin Luther College. I received a scholarship for vocal music from my high school, and I was originally going to go and become a music teacher, but I will admit that I didn't really put too much thought into my career planning. I honestly really just did it because my siblings had gone there, and I just kind of thought, well, this is what you do. I quickly decided that maybe being a music teacher wasn't for me. I've sometimes regretted that decision. I think I would have loved being a teacher, but I am also really happy with where my path ended up, so I don't regret it either. After I left Martin Luther College, I decided I was actually hanging out with a friend, and he had just joined the military, and he's like, hey, you should do this. And so I joined we went to the recruiter, and within 2 weeks of that first initial visit, I found myself enlisted in the Army National Guard and in Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training for infantry. It was another not well thought out decision on my part. I didn't do really any planning. It all just kind of happened in 2 weeks. So I did that for a couple years. I was going to school. When I got out from basic training, I went to school in Minnesota, and I started wanting to learn as much as I could about other religions, Mormonism and Catholicism, Judaism, atheism, as many different perspectives as I could. This period of my life is where I started really digging into other perspectives. In 2005, several different big events happened in my life. This first one here is hard for me to talk about because I'm really not proud of it. But I had still been struggling with smoking marijuana while I was in the Army National Guard, and for one of the training weekends, one of the drill weekends, we had to go and take a drug test, and I failed it. And I was given a general discharge under honorable circumstances, because I'm sorry. I've even thought about re-enlisting at different points in my life because I was so ashamed that I abandoned the rest of my fellow infantrymen, guardsmen. I really felt like I let them down. And the truth is that I did. I used a negative coping mechanism to try and fill a hole in my heart, a God-shaped hole, I believe. And I became dependent on it and started not being able to manage my life. And that led to a very real consequence of losing a job, an important job. And I have nothing but absolute respect for all the brave men and women who fight and defend our country, fight for and defend our country. Thank you so much for your service. And all I can say is I'm sorry for my sin. And I've asked for forgiveness. And I trust that God has forgiven me for that. But it is one of the things that I do regret the most in my life. It's hard for me to talk about it, and I thought of maybe not even bringing it up. But I'm trying to be as real and open and vulnerable as I can be. That same year, something really, really great happened in my life, though, and I got married and started a family with my high school sweetheart. And so it was kind of off to the races. We had one child, and then 18 months later, we had our second son, and then our beautiful daughter, Olivia, came not too long after that. I started working at as a financial planner with a place called Thrivent Financial. I would do retirement plans for people and help them plan their savings for school or vacations or whatever. I enjoyed that job quite a bit. I liked helping people. I didn't necessarily really like being a salesman too much. And I also was working really, really heavy hours. And my kids were little at the time and cute, and I wanted to be with them as much as possible. And so I had been doing a retirement plan for a couple of correctional sergeants who worked with the state. And they had really, really great benefits and pay. And so I thought, hey, I'll try that. I'll have set hours, and it'll be good for the family. So I applied and got the job as a correctional officer for a women's prison near the town that I live in here in Fond du Lac. I had been working at the prison for about 3 years, and during most of my time there, I worked on the mental health unit. We were told that about roughly 75% or more of the offenders that were housed at this prison had some type of diagnosed mental illness. And so there was a great need. Only a few of them, though, got to the most acute and serious cases were housed on the mental health unit. And so I worked on the security end, side by side with mental health professionals. And it was just, I developed a lot of empathy with that job because I would go on my rounds and talk to all of the different women that were assigned to the unit that I was in charge of, and I would hear their stories, and I would listen to how they got to be incarcerated, and my heart just broke for so many of them, most of them, because it's like, yeah, you always have a choice in life, but sometimes when you're raised in a crack house or have been horribly abused as a child, it's like your choices are bad and horrible. And sometimes people would even flee their families and start pseudo families with gangs or whatever just to escape. And the other troubling statistic that I learned later in life is that roughly 85 to 92% of all people incarcerated in our jails and prisons in the United States, which, by the way, the United States incarcerates more of our population per capita than any other nation in the world. But 85 to 92% of those people in our jails and prisons are there for some type of drug or alcohol related offense, whether it's to obtain substances or because they're under the influence or they're selling or what have you. So, you know, these people need help. They need treatment. But unfortunately, corrections is one of the last places that more funds are budgeted for, because people want to just the tendency is to want to sweep things under the rug and just leave it. Well, then you get a revolving door of people that keep reoffending because they're not getting better. They're not getting the treatment that they need. Only a few are. And these mental health professionals that I worked with at the prison were doing their best, but their caseloads were ridiculous. And also, you know, I, coming off the street, had 6 weeks of training when I first started, we were even dispensing medications as officers. They since filed a lawsuit so that the nurses now do that. But in 6 weeks, we had to learn everything about all the psychotropic medications. We had to learn about how to be the front line for many mentally ill people. What I mean by that is the mental health professionals would work from 8 to 4 usually. And so the rest of the time, these correctional officers, some of them fresh out of high school, are in charge of trying to work with people who are manic or having serious mental health episodes of some kind. And so there was often altercations that would arise because of that. And now what I want to make sure I'm careful of here is the correctional officers there were all doing their best, and they were good people. But they were understaffed and there weren't enough resources to do the work that needed to be done. I want to emphasize that because it's really a problem in our society. We need to help each other and not just throw people away like that. I get that there needs to be consequences for sin, of course, but always with the intent of trying to help and heal people who are trying their best from whatever past that they've come from. Okay, so in 2012, while I was still working at the prison, was the second most negative event in my life. So I had been sober for, I want to say, about a year, where I hadn't been smoking anything, or I was just clean and clear. And but one of the issues that I was noticing is that I was still pretty low energy. And so I was talking to my mom one day about this, and she mentioned that that I should get my thyroid checked, that there was a family history of thyroid issues, and that might be something to look into. So I went to see a nurse practitioner, and she had just started a new practice. And when I was there talking to her, one of the things that was also going on at the time, and so this is where it gets into, I have to tell a little bit of someone's story, but just because it is what gives some context to what I went through. So I'm going to try to keep it high level as much as I can, and not to disparage anyone. That's not my goal with any of this, truly. But my wife's dad was going through a really hard time with his own struggles and with substances, and he was checking himself into the hospital and in and out like 3 times a week it was getting to be. So they said, we can't treat him unless he gets third-party petition to stay here. And it had to be done, but it's a really, really hard thing to do to someone. So that was, they had to do that, and it was heavy on the family at the time. And I was just sharing that in small talk, and the nurse practitioner said, oh, that sounds pretty stressful. Have you ever thought about taking something for anxiety? And I left that initial appointment saying, I'd rather not be dependent on anything, because I truly didn't want to be. I was trying to be free and clear from any substances in my body. And but I had a week to think about it, and I went back to get the results of the thyroid stuff and to talk to her again. And I thought, you know what, maybe this will take the edge off. Maybe this will be something that would help me. So she prescribed me a medication called Clonazepam. I've since learned that that's in the benzodiazepine family, which is basically synthetic alcohol in a pill. It makes the user feel like they've had a drink or two. I didn't drink, and I had no tolerance. And also, I took more than I should have originally. It wasn't too much more though, and but what happened is once I was under the influence of it, they think that I took more. I don't remember, because what happened was I blacked out on this. The first day that I took it, she gave me a 90-day supply of this benzodiazepine, and the first day that I took it, I blacked out for about 14 hours. And when I came to, I was in the back seat of a police car. So what had happened was, while I was blacked out, there was a point where, so my ex-wife she had not seen me like that. I had not usually been that out of control because I didn't do those types of things. And so this was very out of the ordinary, to the point where she quickly went over to my sister's house, and they called the police and said, "Hey, there's something going on here. Something's wrong with David." So they called the police. Before that had happened, though, there was a point where all I can really remember is I did remember feeling out of control, and I thought, it was just a big swirling mess in my brain. I just have snapshots of that day. More and more came back to me after, but initially I didn't remember anything. But there was a point where I was trying to leave the house, and my ex-wife was standing between me and the door, and I did like a running back move past her, and she fell onto the couch, and I left the house. When she was describing the situation to the police, they initially charged me with a felony for battery, I think. No, for strangulation is what it was, and suffocation when she was first telling the story. And then she clarified it and said, absolutely not, that's not what happened. And she even drew a diagram and said, this is not what happened. But I was left with a misdemeanor domestic abuse. And that really, really hurt because, and look, this is a very sensitive thing to talk about. And the truth is that I've been labeled as an abuser for much of my life since then. The God's honest truth is that I've never punched anyone in my entire life. I've never tried to strike anyone in my entire life. And I am being completely honest and true about that. And you can believe me or not, but it's the truth. My ex-wife has admitted since then that I was not abusive to her. She admitted it initially right away, and then has since even defended me more recently, which I'll get to. But that was really, really difficult. And, as a correctional officer, I did learn, we were taught to charge the highest offense in hopes that something would stick as the offenders went through the process. And I don't know that that's a great practice, because it can really destroy people's lives. People should only be charged with what they did. Anyway, the other thing that happened at that night is there was a point where I was driving around, and the next day I had told the investigator that is because I thought I needed gas money, but that made no sense because I had plenty of gas in the car. But anyway, at some point while I was driving, I stopped by my ex-mother-in-law's house and took $7 and a can of soda off of her kitchen table. And it was theft, I took it from her. It was family, but so I was charged with two things, the domestic battery and theft. And they're both misdemeanors, but previously to that, I had no criminal record. I'd been pulled over a couple times for speeding, but this was the first time where I had a criminal record, and it changed my life. I was, as I said, I was put in jail, and not only jail, I was put in solitary confinement, because anytime any type of law enforcement or even correctional staff are put in jail, they're automatically put on suicide watch. I expressed no thoughts of harming myself, but it's just one of their protocols because they've had issues in the past. So I spent about a week in a cell the size of about the typical bathroom with not even clothes to wear. They only gave me a Velcro smock. I was allowed toilet paper when I asked for it. I was allowed a Bible after 3 days, I think it was, when the mental health staff cleared it for me. And so I just sat there and read the Bible, I think like 3 times, cover to cover. When I was released, I went to treatment for substances and completed it with staff approval, and then voluntary went on to complete a halfway house and aftercare, which went for about 1.5 years after. Unfortunately, while I was in treatment, my ex-wife filed for divorce. She told me that the way it went down, and I'm taking her word for it, but she said that her mom gave her $1,200 and said, "You go and do this or I'm disowning you." Keep in mind that her dad had kind of fallen off the deep end there. And again, I'm not saying any of this to disparage. They have very real reasons for the struggles that they've gone through, and I love them, all of them, very dearly, and respect them still. They're a part of my family still. And so it was a very difficult time for all of us. I know that none of us asked for that. And but so while I was still in treatment, I actually found out online through CCAP, which is the Wisconsin Circuit Court Access website, and found out that she had filed for divorce, and it broke my heart. She had not expressed any warnings about thinking about divorce, and we didn't do any trial separation or anything. I tried to work with our pastors to do some counseling, but we never even had one counseling session. And so it was hard because on the one hand, I was being accused of abandoning the marriage, but I felt like I was doing everything I could to try and work it out and talk and communicate and mend those bridges. I felt terrible for my sin. I was truly just trying to get better and seek help for the things that I had been coping with since I was a boy. And unfortunately, it just led to more trouble. So I went home to find all my stuff was in the garage, and I moved into my parents' house. There was a short period where I wasn't even really allowed to see my kids, a little bit on the weekends. That quickly changed, and I got to 50-50 placement with them, thankfully, very quickly. But I was living in my parents' basement for about 2 years, and found myself that it was really, really difficult to find a job now. I'm not trying to be arrogant when I say this, but in the past, it hadn't been that difficult for me to find a job. You know, I'll be the first to admit I had a privileged start to life. You know, I was raised in a middle-class family. I'm straight white male, and but now it was different. When I'd go places, even though I had experience or was would be good for the job or would have normally been able to get that job, because I had these misdemeanors on my record now, especially the theft has been the biggest trouble. It was impossible, really. I could find factory jobs, and so I did work in a couple different factories. The second one that I worked at was I was being trained to be the lead in the area, and this woman who was training me told me to do some maintenance on a machine, and while I was still doing what she told me to do, she went and turned it on. It's supposed to be locked out and tagged out, but long story short, I had part of this hydraulic fork crushed my hand, and I had part of my right index finger amputated, partially amputated. The first thought that went through my mind was I was happy that it wasn't my left hand, so I could still play guitar a little bit at least. So that shows kind of the mentality that I have. The good news is that, in case you're wondering, just the tip of your finger is worth about $12,000. So I was able to buy a car and had some money from that. But I certainly wouldn't recommend it. I want to share one story that was a question that came up in my mind when I was watching my two boys play in the backyard of my parents' house when I was living there. I remembered thinking, if I was God, and obviously I'm not God, but I was just thinking, if I was God, and I knew from eternity that one of my sons was going to go to hell, I thought, it seems like it would be better that they didn't even exist. Whatever experience they might have in this short life, it just doesn't seem worth eternal torment. And that's certainly true, but it got me thinking more about free will. And so I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. After this happened, the divorce and having a criminal record and all that, I was pretty low, trying to rebuild my life. and not feeling too much direction. But I did start going back to school online, and I started a band at my church. They had typically only really had organ music in the past, and I was like, hey, let's get some drums and a guitar in here and see if we can play a different style of music for worship. And so we started that, and it was a really joyful experience for me, and was able to recruit a couple friends to help me out, and I have some great memories from all that, and hope to continue it again one day. I had started writing songs a little bit, but I wasn't really finding my voice, I guess you could say. I was really laboring at it. And then I had an experience the night that and I shared this in my first video, the night that my ex-wife remarried her new husband, which is about 2-ish years after our divorce. I was sitting in my parents' basement, and I was realizing that my kids were over at the wedding for my ex-wife and her new husband, and I was asking myself how I got to be where I was. And I felt inspired to write a song called Children of the Light, and it was the first experience I had where it sort of felt like the song was already there, and I just had to write it down. Like it was already written, and it happened in about 5-10 minutes, honestly. It just flowed out, and the melody and the lyrics, and I really, really liked it. And it was the first song that we ever recorded, and it made me and my friends Joel and Eric fall really in love with the recording process and with writing songs, and it eventually led to us writing an entire album. So I was really, really thankful for that experience too. I met a really great sound engineer named Corey, who we worked together really well, and he was able to help facilitate some of my ideas, and so that led to this band, what's become a spiritual part of my spiritual journey, and wanting to reach other people and strengthen my own faith. And then after that, I applied for what's called a Working Families Grant at a college called Marian University in Fond du Lac here, and I was accepted. And what this grant is there's a private donor who gives a tremendous gift to the college to help single parents who are trying to get their education and kind of rise up out of poverty. And so I was so thankful to have that experience. And I switched my major from business, what it had been while I was going online, to the psychology world, because for the first time, I did some career planning in my life, and everything pointed to mental health, to being a mental health professional. And so I completed my bachelor's degree at Marian University through this Working Families Grant. And so now I'm in a master's program, and about to, God willing, start my practicum and then my internships, and hopefully a year from now I will be a licensed professional counselor. I'm really, really excited for this path because it allows me to use my experience to help others, and also to gain more perspectives. I really like listening to people and their stories, and being real and open and honest as much as possible, and this is a perfect job for that. So I'm really, really excited about it. And I want to say as an encouragement, if you're someone out there who feels like you kind of don't have a real path, to just keep letting your heart or your light guide you, and your values, and eventually you'll find where you want to be. Don't get discouraged. Use each past experience as a stepping stone to learn and grow and gain wisdom for what you want to do with your life. That certainly worked out for me, and there was a time where I did not see that happening. Okay, I'm getting near to the end current with my story. We're about a couple of years back now, and so I'm going to be getting into kind of the last struggle that I've been going through recently. And so when I was in my last semester of my undergrad, at Marian University, I decided I would try online dating. I had purposely stayed away from dating for the first couple of years after the divorce because that's what I was advised by my pastor would be a good idea. He said you don't want to find someone and use them to fill a need in your life that's right now while you're healing, and then when that need goes away, that the relationship is founded on the wrong things or in the wrong place. So I followed that advice. I thought it was good advice. And I was very, very busy with all of the things that I was working on to rebuild my life. So I thought, you know what, maybe online dating is the thing. There was a girl who listed her faith as being important in her profile. And so we started dating. And the other sin that I'm very not proud of is that I had sex before I was married with her. I think it was about 2 months in. It was too fast. And I learned why God says in his word, don't have sex before you're married. God doesn't give arbitrary rules, I feel. I think he gives guidelines for what will bring us the most joy in this life. And what I mean is, so when this girl and I had started dating and we started talking about being physical in our relationship, we talked about contraceptives, and she mentioned she was on birth control. And so we went ahead. And then about a month later, things started not being as sunshiny and rosy in our relationship. And I broke up with her. But then 3 days later, she called me up and said that she was pregnant. And so this person that I really barely knew, only for 3 months, I now had to make a decision of, okay, how do I handle the consequences of my sin? And now I've brought another person into it. And that's why God says don't have sex before you're married, because it causes tremendous pain for everyone involved, especially the kids. I remember telling her early on, one of the first times we talked, I don't want to put any more kids through divorce. But I didn't make choices that would defend that decision or that value that I had. Instead, I made choices completely opposite to that led to exactly what I didn't want. I decided it'd be best to try and make it work with her. So we started our relationship back up, and we talked about going to couples counseling. And then we even had a ceremony and were married. But the thing that happened was, because I was in this Working Families Grant program that was for single parents, and when I was telling the director of the program that I was getting married, she's like, it would be really, really probably a good idea if you would wait until after the semester's over, because otherwise you might have to give some money back since it's for single parents. So we talked, and we decided we'd still have the ceremony in church, but that we would wait to sign the paperwork with the state. So we went ahead with that, and the plan was we were going to start marriage counseling at her church and then move over to the pastor at my church, and that we would live in this area. When we were on our way, when I picked her up and we were on our way to our first counseling appointment, she was yelling at me that I didn't make enough money. And I'm just being honest. That's how the whole car ride went. And I think I know where that was coming from with her. She was, panicking a little bit about having yet another child. She had 2 children already with 2 different dads. And, she had shared with, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But so what happened was we got to the church and I said, look, I don't really want to walk in there right now with you yelling at me like this. I'd like to start out peacefully if possible. And I said, why don't we meet there next time instead of driving together? And so I drove her back home and went back to my house, and because we weren't yet living together, we were working that out. I called her up to schedule the next appointment, and she told me she was done with the marriage, done with me, and done with the child. that she wanted out of all of it. So she abandoned our marriage. And then after, I think, about a month, it changed to she wanted to try adoption. And because we live about an hour away, I did consider that for a minute. But I came to the realization after talking with a family member that I wouldn't be able to handle that. I couldn't handle knowing that my child was out there in the world and that I wasn't being their father. That was my choice. So we initially did talk about adoption, though, and I actually talked to one of my pastor friends who had another pastor friend who they had adopted one child already, and they were looking to adopt another one. So I said, hey, this might be a good couple. But then she decided that she wanted to be involved in the child's life, which is awesome, and I'm actually thankful for that. I think she'll be a really good mom. She has been a good mom, and I want to say that I have love for her too, even though it's not great how things ended with us. As the mother of my child, I want to have a great co-parenting relationship with her for the sake of our child. And what I was going to say before is that she had shared with me early on in the relationship that she had experienced some negative things with her father when she was a kid. And I'll just leave it at that because I don't actually know the specifics. I know some things that she said to me, but I only have a high level version of it. As the months went on, I started to realize that this was going to be a much different battle than what I'd gone through with my divorce. What I mean by that is because we weren't married with the state, the unfortunate truth, at least in the state of Wisconsin, is that dads have very, very few rights, really none before the child is born. And then even after, it's a really uphill battle. So I filed some paperwork with the state, which I expressed that I believed that I was the father of this child. And I was told that that would prevent her from being able to just go off and do anything without me, that I would at least be included. I tried to talk with her about placement once our daughter was born, or to talk about naming the child, and asked if I could be involved as much as I could. But I was shut out of that process, and I wasn't allowed to even see my daughter until about a month or two after she was born, about a month and a half. I wasn't allowed to be a part of the naming process. As soon as she was born, I contacted the child support agency in her area and tried to get my case started. It took about a month for them to assign my case to a caseworker. And then the first thing that I had to do was establish paternity. So I went and did my part on that immediately, was faithful to every step of the process as quickly as possible because I was trying to bring her home. One of the things that had been happening at that time too was, so this was early 2020, and our band, His Witness, had been working towards our first our concert of original material. We were blessed to do that in 3/14 of 2020. But then right after that, COVID locked the world down. So I had gotten my part of the paternity test done, but she had unfortunately not gotten our daughter in there to finish her side of it. And so the courts were basically locked down for a couple months. Things opened up a little bit, and I was around June and Father's Day. So the way it worked, she was only allowing me to have visits at her parents' house. So I would take my kids and even my parents, and we'd all go visit an hour away in the living room of her parents' house to see my child. And then that was all we were allowed. She wouldn't allow me to bring her home ever. I wasn't allowed to bring her home until her first birthday. On Father's Day of that year, which was when she was about 6 months old-ish, I had been talking with her mom's dad, and I was asking him if I could have her for Father's Day, begging him if I could at least have her for Father's Day. And he said, yeah, that sounds good. I'll go ask her. And he did. And he came back and said, not only can you not have her, but I don't think I can be in the middle of your communication anymore, which kind of gave me the impression that, well, I'll just leave it at that. I was devastated by that. I was so devastated by that there's this sign that I keep above my living room, above the TV in my living room. It's a Bible passage. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." Well, when this happened and I wasn't even allowed to have my daughter on Father's Day after 6 months of not being able to bring her home, I took that sign off the wall and I put it in my back hall. I don't remember ever doing something like that in my life before. It was like I was denying God, or I was at least showing my anger. The next morning, I felt guilty and put it back up right away. I felt really guilty. A couple months went by, and this was about September of last year. We finally had the first initial family court hearing. Things had opened back up, and so I was really hopeful that I was going to get some placement time with my daughter at this hearing. And I thought that finally some justice would come into the picture. But unfortunately, what happened is all they did is the commissioner asked, okay, what's the placement been? And because the placement had been what my daughter's mom had dictated, not allowing me to ever have her, she said, that's what we're going to keep it at for now. And she ordered mediation for us. And that was it. I was absolutely devastated by that as well. And I went home and did the same thing that I did on Father's Day, where I took the sign down that says, "Be still and know that I am God," and I put it in my back hall. I was mad at God. Should have been mad at myself. I put it back up on the wall the next morning and felt guilty again. A couple months went by and we had mediation. We went, well, before I get to that, I was fighting 2 court battles last year. So one was to try and bring my daughter home, and the other one was to try and get my record sealed. So nearly 10 years had gone by since the incident in 2012 where I had suddenly incurred these misdemeanor convictions on my record. And after I got my bachelor's degree, I went in a suit and tie with my resume and all my job experience, and I tried to get a third shift stocking job at Walmart, and they wouldn't even take me for that because I had the theft on my record. And it felt like I couldn't get a job anywhere no matter what I did. Like there was no road to redemption. And unfortunately, that's kind of the case for many people. I was too old when that event happened for me to expunge my record. You have to be under 25. I was 27 when that happened with the medication. So I worked with an attorney, and she said, well, you've put your life back together and you're in a master's program now for clinical counseling, and you volunteer with all these different pursuits and are active with your faith community. And so she said there was also precedence of other cases like mine that had their records sealed. And what it means to have it sealed is just that no one can see it. It's still there, but that you can get jobs. When I had the hearing for that in, I think it was November or late October of last year. And the judge looked at everything and he said, look, you are a model example of someone who's put their life back together. And he said, I want nothing more than to be able to help you with this, but I just can't. I don't have the authority. So that was the third time I went home. I was absolutely beside myself. I thought, what's the point? I can't get my child. I can't get a job, even though I've been working so hard and have an education and want to help people. What options do I have? I took the sign down again, and then I threw it into my basement, and the frame of it shattered off. So it was in several pieces. I felt terrible, and I felt like Peter from the Bible, who denied Christ 3 times. And I had to get down on my hands and knees with a hammer and nails and nail that thing back together. And it reminded me of Christ. So I put it back on my wall, and that thing's never coming down. After that experience, I used a mind-altering substance again. And after that weekend, I started to look at things a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is I thought, I do need to trust God more. I got myself into these messes, and I shouldn't be blaming him. I should be blaming myself. A couple months later, I had the experience of my friend David dying, and the manner in which it went down really shook me to my core. And I shared that a little bit in my previous video, but that's when that happened earlier this year. That had a profound effect on my life, and me wanting to share my story with you here today, actually, and wanting to be more fully known and in the light, because I'd rather stumble into the light than wander in the darkness. So I realize that people will possibly attack my vulnerability here today. But like I said, if it helps even one person feel less alone and trapped, then it's worth it. Over Christmas of last year, I had to go and do the mediation that was ordered for the placement case for my 1-year-old daughter. And through that mediation, her mother and I came to an agreement of 50-50 placement that we would work up to over the next couple months. I was really, really happy that we came to that agreement with a third party through mediation. But unfortunately, she backed out of the agreement just before Christmas Eve of last year. And it was really, really hard. I had to then hire an attorney and order a guardian ad litem, so that a guardian ad litem is an attorney for children in placement cases who looks at what is best for the child. And so I was excited to get to that point, because I trusted that as she looked into it, she would see that I'm a good father, and that it would be best for my daughter to have her father in her life. The guardian ad litem asked for 10 references. I put my ex-wife as the top reference in that case. And that's because we had really bonded last year over some health issues with my son. And it just become closer as the years went on. And I trusted her so much so that I was willing to put her as my number one reference to vouch for me for not being abusive and not being a bad father. And she did that for me. And I was so thankful that she did that. And I think it was really a testament to how strong our relationship was at the time. One of the other things that came up is we talked about, a lot of the things that happened in the past and the divorce. And for one of my classes, my counseling children and adolescents class that I was taking last semester, my instructor had us watch a documentary on Netflix called I Am Maris. And it's all about this girl who uses a negative coping mechanism to deal with the lack of control that she feels in her life. And it was a little girl, and it reminded me that my ex-wife had struggled with the same thing when we were married. I had actually found evidence of it. And so we were talking about that, and I said I'd totally forgotten about that. We were two people both struggling with deep traumas from our past, and we were both trying to use these negative coping mechanisms to fill those holes in our hearts, and we became insecure and shut off from each other. So the reason our marriage failed was because our communication failed. Truly, that was at the heart of everything. We stopped talking to each other, and we stopped making time for each other, and we stopped being vulnerable and fully known to each other. And we became two separate islands, and we just drifted apart. So we were talking about that, and we were recapping how things went down. She expressed regret over how the divorce happened. She said she would have done things differently if she had the opportunity. And then she even said she was willing to apologize to me in front of the kids about the divorce. Not for the things that led up to it or anything else, but just for the actual act of divorcing. She did express some regret over that. And even though she's moved on and has a new husband and children and a life there, she was willing to come over and do that. So I really, really appreciated that. We set up a time for that to happen, and I'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk to you about something that many people in my life that I trust and admire have told me that I shouldn't talk about because I'll sound crazy. And it has to do with numbers. So that's why I talked about the numbers at the beginning of my story and why I even had any associations with them. It was from the book of Revelation that I was taught as a boy. So if they sound crazy, I guess you can blame the Bible. But for me, I did take that seriously, and the symbolism that is used in the book of Revelation, that meant something to me, and I was always fascinated by it. I was also always fascinated by there's this scroll that, as John is being told the different scrolls to write down the information and put it in the Bible for us, there's one that God gets to and he says, but don't write that down. And I was always fascinated by what that secret is. What is there that God knows that we can't know now, but he is going so far as to tell us that he's not telling us? That's very interesting to me. It always was. So I started seeing a number in my life that just led to a kind of a weird place. And so the number was 37, and where it first appeared, first of all, I want to talk to you about what my grandma used to say on our birthdays. So if I was turning like 5 years old, she would say, you're in your 6th year. And that's because when you're born, you're technically 0 until you reach your first birthday. And then you've achieved 1, and then you're in your 2nd year. So this last year, I was in my 37th year, but I was 36 years old. I watched the Disney Pixar movie Soul. And in that movie, I love that movie. I recommend it if you haven't seen it. But there's this place called The Great Before, where they're talking about where souls are kind of put together. And one of the little souls is called 37. And the instructor says, 37, quiet down, quiet coyote, or something like that. And I didn't really subconsciously pick it up at the time. But then I wrote a song, the song I'm going to be releasing next. It's called The Great Unknown. And that song is all about me professing that I'm no longer afraid of eternity, that the panic attacks have no hold over me anymore. And, when you write a song, one of the things you have to get right and nail down is the beats per minute, the BPM, and because you don't want the song to sound too rushed or like it's dragging. So you want it to be in that perfect groove. And the beats per minute for that song was 137. And so again, it's just like, okay, whatever. Wasn't really making anything of it yet. Then on 3/6 of 21, March 6th, I had a very heavy emotional day. I was distraught about the placement battle that I was in, and I was worried that I had put trust in my ex-wife that maybe I shouldn't have, and I was worried about if she really would say good things about me and that maybe it would keep me from seeing my daughter. I wanted to trust her, and I did, but I was scared, and I was even I was crying for most of the day about it. I was just besides myself. And I even asked my mom to come over just to give me a hug, which is something I don't think I've ever done. So it was just a really weird black day. But then on 3/7/21, and this is what was kind of strange, and this is where I also have to get into mentioning someone else's story. But I want to emphasize before I do that I am absolutely not trying to disparage my mom. I love my mom. My mom is like the best mom in the whole world. She has been so incredibly loving and kind my whole life. She takes being a mom so seriously, and she is awesome at it. I love her to the moon and back and beyond. But something that was a secret was that she had had a child before she married my dad. And the reason I'm bringing that up is all at once on 3/7, I realized that this fictitious mark of the beast that I had placed on myself or thought was there in my life when I was a boy, and for whatever reason that serpent of chaos, you could say, was allowed into my life, that pornography, which changed everything for me spiritually and mentally and emotionally and everything. I suddenly realized that I wasn't the sixth child of my mom. I was the seventh child of my mom's and the sixth child of my dad's. And then I realized too that I was born on 6/30, but I was baptized into God's family in July, in the 7th month. And then I realized the color indigo, I said it's not really its own color. It's sort of a deception in that it's two colors mixed together. It's blue and violet. It's the sixth color, but what makes it beautiful is the seventh color. And by the way, violet is the color for royalty or for our king, and 7 is the color for Jesus. What makes the sixth color beautiful is the violet bleeding into the blue. I think that's really great symbolism for what Christ does in this life for us. Blue is sometimes a color attributed to earth. It's mostly water. Blue is also attributed to sadness, feeling blue, the blues. Christ did bleed into our blue and made us beautiful. It's interesting because there are 3 primary colors, but there are 7 colors in the rainbow. I mentioned to you the 36 and the 37. So then I was like, okay, is there any biblical significance to these numbers? And so I did some studying and research on them. And it turns out that there is. So it said not to think, a couple different sources said not to think of 37 as 37, but as 3 sevens, 777. And not to think of 36 as 36, but as 3 sixes, 666. I was born on 6/30, which is 36 backwards. So now at this point, I'm just kind of it's like, okay, I've seen this weird pattern in my life. And you can say that's dumb. It's whatever. And I'll accept that. I'm not making any investment decisions off of these numbers or anything like that. But at the same time, it was incredibly touching for me because that nagging feeling that I had, I realized that if you go back deep enough, there's explanations for just about everything. And that sent me on a kind of a weird spiritual, it unlocked something in my brain. And I wanted to look back at the numbers in Revelation. I wanted to find out more about this because the sixes, it's the passage in Romans, it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. In all things, we believe that even in the dark times, God is able to turn those and twist those into something beautiful for his people. And I started thinking about maybe God, if he could do this in my life, why can't he do it in everyone's life? And so I'll get back to that in just a minute. I want to talk to you about something that happened then when my ex-wife came over to apologize about the divorce. She did so, and I tried to make it as gracious as possible because my aim was not to point the finger at her. And one of the ways that I wanted to do that was I wanted to showcase and model my own vulnerability. So I decided to share that I had broken down last year and used a mind-altering substance again. And I waited 6 months to do that, and the reason for that is I didn't want it to be like I'm out of control right now or anything. But I wanted it to be recent enough so that it was something that I didn't really want to share. It was a bigger thing. And because my kids were there too, I wanted it to also be a situation where I was modeling vulnerability for them so that if they're ever at a party or doing something they shouldn't do and they get into trouble, they think, hey, I can call dad because he'll understand and he'll listen and want to help. Then also, I felt that this was the only appropriate time to share any feelings I might have about the situation because, we hadn't talked about anything since the divorce, and we wouldn't be again after this day. I wanted to bring some closure in this day if possible, closure that we hadn't had yet, and mainly for my kids. So they've been having to bounce between houses since then, and I just thought it could bring some peace. So after she apologized, I said, I forgive you and thank you for that. And I know that you've got this new life and a new husband and kids, and I understand that you probably don't want to leave that, but I wished we could rebuild our family, and I certainly think God would bless you either way, meaning bless her if she stayed with her current husband, but certainly bless her if she wanted to rebuild her life with her original husband, who she made her original bond with. And then I finished by saying, I'm going to also love you and support you no matter what, as the mother of my children, co-parent, and as my friend. So I was trying to make it as not pressured as possible, but to also share the feelings that I had. I didn't make a grand big scene of it. I didn't buy a ring or anything. I just shared my feelings in what I felt to be a loving and gracious way. Some might think that that was a reckless decision and that I shouldn't have done that. And if that's your opinion, I can appreciate that. We all have feelings, and so I also wanted to model that it's okay to share your feelings, even if the other person doesn't agree with them. So I stand behind those decisions personally. But what happened was, I think, now I can only speculate here, so this is where I'm going to try to leave things as much as possible with this particular situation, but she ended up filing to try and change placement to have the kids taken away from me. And she cited that I was obsessed and delusional about getting back together with her. All I can say is that I'm not. I've been dating other people since then and talking to other people. It wasn't my goal again to make some grand scene of it. I was just trying to kindly share my feelings in a way that was supporting her no matter what. So I think, though, she possibly felt put in the hot seat in that moment and that it made her look bad. I think the kids saw her strength in that moment, truly. And I know that we'll heal from this, but we are actually currently in a placement battle and a guardian ad litem investigation. I shared with her the experience that I had with the numbers, and so now I'm having to take a mental health assessment, and I guess the point of that is to see whether I'm fit to have my 3 older children in my life still. And so it hurts. I'm in 2 placement battles still. I don't have, I get to see my 1-year-old daughter on Wednesdays and every other Saturday. That'll hopefully be increasing soon as this wraps up, but there's no promises there. I hope to be able to keep my 3 children and my house. I live in government housing right now as I'm finishing my master's program, and it's based on the placement that I have with my kids, so I would be homeless if my placement changes. I pray that this case fizzles out soon and that her and I can rebuild our relationship as co-parents. I do apologize to her if she ever watches this. If she thought I was trying to trap her or make her look bad, that wasn't my goal. And I appreciated our relationship as co-parents before, and again, hope that we can get back to that. Anyway, so I want to move on from that now and talk about an experience that I had with with a church that I attended, and there was a pastor who I'll leave nameless out of respect to him, but he he said something during a sermon one time that struck me and bothered me. He said that Judas was burning in the fires of hell. Judas from the Bible. And I thought, is that really what God's word says? It's like God's word is very clear about things it wants to be clear about, like ceremonial laws as an example. But it doesn't say Judas is in hell. There's a couple different interpretations of that. It says, I've heard it said that he went to the place that he deserved, or that he got what he deserved. And I guess a question I had is, if Judas didn't believe Jesus was the Christ, would he have felt guilty enough to try and give the money back that he received for betraying him? And if he didn't believe Jesus was the Christ, would he feel so guilty as to take his own life? I feel like if he didn't believe he was the Christ, he wouldn't have cared about those things. I don't know. I do know there's a passage in the Bible that says, "Judge not lest ye be judged," referring to someone's eternal damnation or eternal fate. If a friend of yours is running headlong towards a cliff, it's good to say, watch out. And so I'm not saying that. But as far as someone's eternal fate, that's not in our hands, thankfully. That's in the hands of our Creator. And so with Judas, he hung himself in the potter's field. That's a place that you could say he deserved. He was labeled the betrayer of Christ. You could say that's something that he deserved. I think it goes a step too far to say that he's burning in the fires of hell, though. And thankfully, after having a conversation with this pastor, he agreed with that, and he changed his stance on it. And I really appreciated that, because that showed a willingness to be open and to accept that was at least open for interpretation. That sent me down a path to want to dig into hell more and more in the Bible. It kind of created this shift in my life, and also the experience that I had with seeing this nagging sort of cursed feeling in my own life be taken away, or that it was never really there in the first place. It was a deception that I played on myself, really. Or you could say that Satan played on me. So then I dug in, and I took a little journey into hell in the Bible, and I asked as many of my friends and spiritual leaders and family if they knew of any passages that list people as being specifically in hell right now in the Bible. And one of the examples I heard was like people in the flood, the people that weren't on the ark. And my argument for that would be, Noah was building that ark for like 100 years or something. And word got out. There's this dude building a boat, and like, wait till you hear why he's building it. He says his God's going to flood the earth and destroy everything. And they're mocking him and making fun of him for a long time. And he keeps building it, and he keeps building it. And then the rains start to fall, and it starts to get like knee high. And then their cities are starting to flood. And then they're drowning. And they're watching the ark, Noah, ride off into the sunset to the new world. And I think it's at least possible that most, if not all of the people who saw that what God said actually happened were maybe motivated by that law message and maybe came to some faith before they died. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to say that maybe God baptized the whole world that day as Noah and his family rode off into the sunset. I could be wrong, and I acknowledge that, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. Another example that came up was the parable of the rich man and poor Lazarus, that lists a rich man as being in hell. The argument there is it's not listed specifically as being a parable, which is very interesting. I was talking to my dad about this, and I said it's almost like jazz sometimes with the way that God is writing in his word. And what I mean by that is, with jazz, they say sometimes it's the notes you don't play that people appreciate. They don't go to the same thing that other people have. They jazz it up a little bit. And so that parable is interesting, or that account is interesting, because it's sitting in the middle of a couple parables, and it starts out the same way as parables and sure seems to be a parable, but it's not titled as a parable in the Bible. And I think that's interesting because it's referring to a rich man. So is it that this is a real rich man that's in hell? Maybe. Maybe it is a parable, but I think it gives a very stern warning to people who try to build up their earthly treasures or wealth in this life rather than focusing on building up their treasures in the life to come in heaven. The other passage that came up, or another one, is in Jude, and it talks about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah serve as an example of those who will suffer eternal condemnation, something to that effect. Forgive me, I'm not exactly quoting it. Feel free to look it up. It's in Jude. To me, that one is probably the closest that the Bible gets to saying that there are people in hell. It says they serve as an example. Could that mean that they are there and that's the example? It could. It could also mean that their sin, so the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, sodomy is named after that. There were angels that were disguised as human men that went into the city, and the people there said, bring them out so we can the men of the city said, bring them out so we can have sex with them. So the sin of Sodom is homosexuality. God does say clearly in the Bible, if you believe the Bible, that homosexuality is wrong. He designed Adam and Eve, the first people for marriage to be between a man and a woman. And so I think what it's actually saying is that those people maybe aren't in hell, but they serve as an example. People who take pride in their sin, that don't even see a need for a savior. It's like you're taking the forbidden fruit, but you're not even doing anything wrong. So that's, to me, dangerous territory when you are doing something against God's word or the Bible, and you're saying it's not wrong. Their city was burned with burning sulfur. That can also be an example of how, I guess my point is it's open for interpretation, I think, still, but it's the closest warning that I've seen so far. But the last one that I want to talk to you about is from the book of 1 Peter, I believe, 2:17 through 19, I think. It's talking, Peter is giving a message, a sermon, if you will, and he's talking about spirits in prison when Jesus went down and descended into hell after he was crucified. Most of the people that I talked to thought that this was basically like a smoking gun, meaning like this is it. And I will admit, when I first looked at this passage, I had to say, okay, this is clearly saying there are spirits in hell. But the thing that struck me is it doesn't say people, it says spirits. And so I looked into that and I read a couple different commentaries. And one of the commentaries that was actually from the association of the church that I belong to. So the way it's listed there is it says that these spirits were disobedient in the time of Noah. So it takes you back to Genesis 6. And then you have to look at, there's a passage that talks about the sons of God were having relations with the daughters of men. And produced from that were an offspring called the Nephilim. This is something that a lot of people have been fascinated by in the Bible and trying to figure out what's going on there. So when you have to look at the original Greek language for the words used for sons of God, and the original Greek words for sons of God is Ben Elohim, and that is used in only a couple places in the Bible. Here, and another place that's used is in Job. In the book of Job, at the beginning, the angels and the demons are presenting themselves to God. Satan is named there, and he says, Job only believes in you because he's got every good thing and he's privileged. Let me have Adam, and he'll sing a different tune. But so the point is that really it's not open for interpretation here. The sons of God is referring to the angelic realm, to the angels and demon spirits. That original text is very clear. What this other commentary wanted to say, though, was that the daughters of men is referring to Cain and all of his descendants as unbelievers. So basically is judging Cain and all of his descendants to hell as unbelievers. I assume because Cain murdered his brother. But here's the thing about the story with Cain. Cain did commit a sin, like we all do, but he had direct contact with God. God spoke to him, and God spared his life and protected him and said, don't hurt him all the rest of the days of his life. Cain was also Adam's son. If I had to bet money on it, I'd bet Cain's probably in heaven, and probably his family too, if he was sharing his faith with them, which I'm sure that seems likely. A cool thought about Cain too that I've thought recently is, it says we were made in the image of God, that Jesus is the Word made flesh, that in the beginning he was the Word that spoke our creation into existence. The image of God, I believe, means that we're eternal. But if you were to take that literally, in a physical sense, and if Jesus is technically Adam's dad because he was the Word that spoke him to life, I don't think it's too crazy to think that possibly in heaven, when we see Adam and Jesus, that Adam might just look like Jesus' son. You might see a little bit of their faces in each other. And carrying that thought on, you might just see a little bit of Jesus' face in Cain too, since he would be Jesus' grandson. Just kind of a cool thought. I don't feel comfortable judging Cain, I guess is what I'm saying here. And so to me, those spirits listed in hell in 1 Peter are not people. And that is awesome, in my opinion. I don't want anybody to be in hell. I believe hell is a real place that actually exists right now. And I'm thankful for that. I want there to be a place where evil can live apart from me forever. Because I hate sin and I hate evil. I don't like it when I'm hurt by people or betrayed by people. I don't like feeling the consequences of my own sin. It's painful. It said the numbers that I was going to get back to that. So when that happened on 3/7 and I started digging into the 777 and how the sevens can even use the sixes, so to speak, to bring about the sevens. And what I mean by that is God, who is perfect, can even use the bad stuff, the evil and sin of this world, to create something beautiful for his purpose. I was fascinated by two sections in Revelation that I want to talk to you about. The first one comes from Revelation chapter 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven and on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing in the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He came and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song. "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they sang, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them singing, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshipped. I'd like to read verse 13 again. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them singing, To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory forever and ever. What stuck out to me about that passage is, he was weeping because no one was worthy to open the scroll to the book of life, meaning we'd all be dead. But then a lamb who had been slain, Christ Jesus, who lived a perfect life and suffered the death that we deserved and conquered death for us and rose again. He is worthy to open the scroll because he is perfect and he is the perfect sacrifice. It says after he has taken the scroll to the book of life, that every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth is singing. And forgive me, but if the scroll to the book of life has been opened and my name's not in it, yes, I'll acknowledge God as Lord, but I'll be screaming and terrified. I think the last thing I'll be doing is singing praises at that moment. I'll be screaming because I'm about to go to hell forever. That was interesting to me. And so there's another section in Revelation 7, and this section is titled The 144,000 Sealed. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. And then it lists 12,000 people from each of the 12 tribes. Now, some people have taken that literally to mean that only 144,000 people of all of the people that have ever existed are going to be in heaven. I personally think that sounds wrong. I think it's probably symbolic, since there's symbolism used with numbers throughout the whole book of Revelation. And it's this, so in Revelation 5, it was 24 elders, or 12 plus 12. Completeness plus completeness. And then in Revelation 7, it's 144,000, or 12 times 12,000. Completeness times completeness. And I started wondering, is that referring to the full body of all of God's creation? And what I mean by the full body, and I'm going to try to explain this as well as I can. When I was thinking about gravity recently, Sir Isaac Newton said that gravity was, when an apple fell on his head, the story goes that he thought that gravity is an invisible force that was pulling that apple down to the earth. Einstein updated that theory, I believe, to say something like that there's a fabric of space-time. And I've seen demonstrations where there's like a 2D fabric, and someone puts a ball onto this fabric and it makes it fall in the middle. And then think about if that'd be the Earth or the sun maybe, and everything orbiting it kind of falls in then to that indentation. And so gravity, he said, was this force that's pushing things down. I didn't really like that visualization because it's 2D, and everything is 3D. So I always like to think of gravity in terms of, if you have a glass of water and it's not full all the way to the top, and then you put a tennis ball in that glass of water, the tennis ball will displace the space the water was in and push it aside. They say vacuum, the space is like a vacuum, and that would create a kind of a suction effect, and it moves the water up, and now that ball is filling that space, but it's like locked into that space. And creating that suction. I don't know if that's a great example or not. That's just how I visualize it. And it made me think about, in the beginning, before God created the heavens and the earth, there's just nothing. There was just God. Or think of it as like God is the universe. He's just the galactic glue that binds all of us together. He is the blank canvas, and he was complete unto himself. He didn't have to take time out of his day that day to sit down and create a masterpiece, a work of art. But our Father did sit down and draw on the blank canvas of himself a work of art. And I was thinking about how if I ever draw a picture or I write a song, that a piece of me is in that song. Or like with my children, I have a piece of them in my heart and they have a piece of me in theirs. But it's like I've put something into that work of art, that a piece of me is in that. And I think in that sense that there's a piece of God in all of us, and you could say likewise, us and him, that we're a piece of his body of work. He made all of us, and he tells us in his word that he loves all of us equally. He tells us in his word that he wants all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. He tells us, we find out in his word that Satan's only allowed to do what God allows him to do. That God has all power, he's all-knowing. He's had literally forever, eternity before he created this world, to devise his master plan of salvation. And if he wants all men to be saved and God is all-powerful, then it comes down to free will. So it's like this. It's like God created, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and in 6 days he made everything, and on the seventh day he rested and blessed it, calling it holy. But he made this perfect, orderly creation. He said everything was good and perfect. And then he put his 2 people in the middle of the Garden of Eden and said they were perfect. And it was a little bit of heaven on earth. It doesn't even say that God created hell in the beginning. Some people have assumed that he must have afterwards, after the fall, but the truth is that God's word doesn't say that specifically. Later on it says that the angels and demons will go to the place that was prepared for them. But originally, this world was prepared for all of us, including them. So that God created the heavens and the earth. And so he made these people. And I was thinking about, again, I'm not God, obviously, thankfully. I am only one of his created people. But I was thinking about if I was and I had the power to create like that, if I had some clay and I was able to mold it into a little guy and then had a couple of these clay guys, and then if I was able to breathe life into them, and then if I was able to give them the very precious gift of free will, being able to make their own choices, to choose to love me or not, to listen to me or not. I'm thankful for the gift of free will. I wouldn't want to be a mindless robot. So God gave them that. And then God allowed something strange, and I asked this question earlier, is why did God allow this serpent of chaos to slither through the cracks of the walls of the garden and come in and stoke the fire a little bit, so to speak? He raised some doubt and even asked a question and then even lied. He says, did God really say this? You will surely not die. So here's Eve, who has just been placed in this perfect creation and told that it's all for her good and told she can eat of any tree, just stay away from the one. And then comes this serpent straight out of hell. She must have thought, like, where did this thing come from telling me that this is all evil and for my bad and that my father's lying to me? She must have panicked. And in that moment, she made a bad choice. She believed the lie. And then she gave it to her husband, and he also believed the lie. And then they wanted to hide, and they felt separated from God. Their sin made them feel separated. And God says, God doesn't say he's going to kill them, but he says, you're going to die now, because the wages of sin is death. Sin kills, evil kills, eventually. And he said, cursed is the ground now because of you. Cursed. We use that cursing, like cursing to hell. He said, cursed is this ground now. And then he says to the serpent, to Satan, he says, cursed are you to the ground all the days of your life. And then God casts Adam and Eve out of that heaven on earth, out of Eden. They can't get back in. No matter how hard they try on their own merits, they cannot get back into that heaven on earth. They're trapped here to die. So the question that I started asking is, like, God's word doesn't say that God created hell, and that he never intended for us to be there. He wanted for us to stay in perfect communion with him. But then he allowed this serpent of chaos into their life, like a serpent of chaos was allowed into my life. And I thought, why? And I thought maybe it's to bring about greater understanding. I don't know. But God promised to them after he cast them out of that perfect garden, he said, I will send my son, and he will provide the way out. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And only through him can you come back to heaven. So I started asking myself, if God cursed this ground and he didn't create, it doesn't say he created hell, did we create hell by separating ourselves from God with sin? And is this hell on earth? And that's a crazy thing to think and say, and it's something that's different than what I've thought about for a long time. But God's word, you have to add to it to say that he created hell. So this is something I want to talk about with people and hear what you have to think. This isn't actual hell because there's a way out still. Real hell is after the final day, when Christ takes those who believe in him and want to be with him to heaven with him, where he is now. Those who want to stay left behind can stay left behind, it seems. And at that point, there's no way out. Hell is forever, because there has to be a time when that door to evil is shut. And I'm thankful for that. But we have a time of grace right now. And what's interesting is getting back to, we talk about how Jesus descended into hell after he was crucified. Well, the light of the world came to shine in our darkness, and he was perfectly loving to everyone. But for a moment, we snuffed out that light. The darkness murdered God, who came down to save us because he loves us. We murdered him when he was perfectly loving and just told the truth. So for those 3 days, which I think are also symbolic of Christ's 33 years, he came to visit us in hell on earth here. Those 3 days when we murdered God here, our hope had been in vain. Had he not risen, we would be trapped. But thankfully, he did rise. And God was not trapped here in hell. He rose victorious and conquered the grave. And through him, all of us can conquer the grave. If God provided a way out through his son for Adam and Eve, who created the original sin, how much more so is he trying to work out his plan of salvation in the lives of all of his created people? Now, I've been thinking a lot about baptism and communion. So at the church I go to, you don't have to know anything about your faith to be baptized. We baptize babies, infants, and they don't understand it, but we baptize them into God's family. It's a symbolic thing that God tells us to do with the water and the word, that we are then made heirs of Christ. And I've been thinking about baptism by fire. We're thrown into the fire here. God threw us into this world and allowed for this chaos to come. And what this chaos is every man for himself. It's free will run rampant. We're all serving ourselves and seeing the consequences of our sin and learning that God's law is true and that what he says is right and designed for our good. And when we come to the end of ourselves in this baptism by fire, I believe that we will have learned the consequences of our sin and have gained an understanding from our experience. Adam and Eve didn't have the benefit of experience when they made their first choice, but then they did experience the consequences of sin. And it's a combination of that law being sealed on our hearts and minds and knowing where evil leads to, and also the gospel of Christ and his grace, his undeserved love that he'll give to us, that he's waiting for us, just like in the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son is a parable of a boy who ran off and spent his inheritance from his father on wild living and his own plans and his own will. And then he realized that it was not the life he wanted, and he missed his father. And he ran back home, and while he was still a long way off, his father greeted him with open arms. I think of God the Father as the great prodigal father. He's perfect, so he didn't run off, but he's the father of the prodigal son, of all of the prodigal children. So I believe that the great prodigal father, Christ, the head of the church, wants to call all of his children back unto himself, his whole body of work. And that when we take communion and we take and bite a piece of Christ, we're remembering, first of all, what it took to win our salvation, that he had to come and allow himself to be murdered in our place, but also to remind us that we are a part of his body. We're a part of him. And he wants his complete, full body of work. He tells us that plainly in his word. And so when we are called and witnessed to the light of salvation, he says, you are now my hands and feet. Christ is the head, and your hands and feet are out to call the rest of his body back into himself. So that's our job. Everybody starts out at different points. You know, it's like, I was thinking about how if someone's in hell, they've chosen to be there. But here's the thing that I also want to say is, as someone who's going in to be a mental health professional, I believe that all mental illness is the result of sin and evil. That if there was no evil, there'd be no mental illness. And that over the generations, it's compounded and compounded as parents who have found themselves rooted in evil ways are now having children who learn from that, and it compounds and compounds, and the light has been distorted into darkness. I think that if someone at this point right now in their life says, I want to go to hell and I want nothing to do with God, that's because they are so mentally ill from the evil of this world that they don't even know what's good for them. They're lost. Jesus, even when he was being murdered on the cross, said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He forgave them even then. The thief on the cross is a great example. His whole family looking up at him might have thought his life was crap, and he's going to hell because his life just looked terrible. He was doing everything wrong. But in his final moments, intimate moments with his Savior, he expressed his faith. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. So judge not lest you be judged. I think most people kick the can down the road with regard to their existence and mortality as far as they can kick it, and some maybe until it can be kicked no further and they're on their deathbed. They say your whole life flashes before your eyes. Is it possible that all of the witnesses who've crossed their path and all of the experience or truths that they've heard in their life and previously rejected for whatever reason, that those come to them in those final moments? I don't know. I think it's certainly possible. I think it puts God in a box when you say it's not possible for him to work out his plan of salvation in someone's life. I think you go too far if you say that you know someone's in heaven or you know someone's in hell. And I want to be clear in saying that I don't know. And that's the point. It's not my place to judge. It's only my place to be a light, to shine as a witness to the light. In the beginning, the very first words that spoke into the darkness were, let there be light. And Christ Jesus was the word that spoke those words. And he was that first light. And we weren't witness to that light then because we weren't yet born. But I feel like I'm a witness to that light now, and I have seen it. And I believe that when Christ comes, that he's going to take me with him to heaven. And I believe I'm in the Bible right now. And what I mean by that is that sealed scroll to the book of life. I'm confident that I'm in that scroll. I just can't see it yet because only one is worthy to open the scroll. And that's Jesus Christ, the Lamb. Now, I've said a lot of things here today that, like I said, may even make some of my brothers and sisters angry. I've experienced a little bit of that recently. I'm certainly not trying to make anyone angry. But I do think these things right now, and I do think that it's the combination of living this life and the grace that Christ shows us, the law and the gospel, which will confirm us in our holiness and make us not ever want to doubt God again. And we'll beg him to be our great judge. He is our great counselor. We will appreciate his order so much after this chaos, I think. I want to quick show a picture to you. It's of a mirror. I want you to think about a two-way mirror. So on one side, it's black and dark and distorted. And on the other side, it's a perfect reflection. I'm going to write the word evil on the dark side. And on the light side, I'm going to draw its reflection, live. I'm going to draw the number 24 on the right, perfect reflection side, as that's symbolic of the 24 elders, or perfection, completeness plus completeness. And then I want to talk about one last number, 42. The number 42 is the reflection of the number 24. They're like palindromes combined to each other, like evil and live are. I said before, I want there to be a place where evil can live apart from me forever, because I don't want to live with evil forever. The number 42 is listed in Revelation as being the amount of time that Satan is allowed to rule on this earth. I think that's symbolic of the time on this earth where he's allowed to stoke the fire and chaos is running rampant. Every man for himself. That's what Satan loves. So that number attributed to this life is 42, I think, and that's the mirror of 24. So I think of this life as a black mirror, which shows us our sin and the consequences of it. You can't count to 7 without going through 6 first. And so I think God in his wisdom possibly knew that the best way is to go through hell in order to get to heaven, so that it's like the sweet is never as sweet without the salty. And having experienced it ourselves, it will mean that much more. Now, what I want to say is Adam and Eve, it's not really Satan's fault. They could have made a better choice and just trusted their father. They could have even gone to their father and said, hey, what's evil like? Like this tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Can you tell us about it? And their father would have gladly shared that information with them to teach them and help them understand. But they chose to go behind their father's back and not to trust him. And so he provided grace. All right, I'm at the end of my story, and if you've made it this far, I am so eternally thankful to you for taking the time out of your day, your busy schedule, to listen to little old me. And I hope, again, that this has helped someone. And now I want to say and close things up. First of all, I want to go back and talk about my mom and thank her because it was her sharing her vulnerability or something that she didn't want to share about her past experience with an adoption in her life that when she shared that with me, it encouraged me when I was in a position considering that very same option. And I know that because she's such a loving mom, that's been really heavy on her heart. But I want to praise her for that decision, first of all, and choosing life. And if there's ever been someone who hasn't chosen life and is feeling guilty, I want you to know you're forgiven through Christ Jesus, our Savior, that doesn't have to weigh you down, and that you can have peace in him. So I want to thank my mom for sharing her story. You know, it's like we hear about David in the Bible slaying the giant and being a hero, but we also hear about David slaying his lover's husband. We hear about Paul, who preached and wrote some of the greatest, most inspiring words in the Bible. But we also hear about when he was called Saul and persecuted Christians. So it's sharing our strength and our weakness with each other and with the next generations that leads to greater understanding. And also remembering that we're all together, we're all in this together, we're all his children, and he loves us all equally. Treat each other with love, the same way that Christ loved us. I want to show you a picture. This is a picture that my brother drew. He's an incredible artist. I really love all my siblings, and this picture, I loved it so much that when I was in third grade, it was more like I was older. I was in like 6th or 7th grade. I tried to recreate this picture, and it was so good. He actually drew it all with pen in like one take, I think. And it was so good that I couldn't recreate it at my age, and I got frustrated, and then I tried to just trace it. And I turned it in for a fine arts fair and even won a blue ribbon for it. And then it was discovered that I traced it, and I had to go back and give that ribbon up. And I want to show you the picture. I'm hoping you'll be able to see it in the focus. It's a picture of Christ on the cross, and it says, "Father, forgive them." God knew that when he made us and gave us this precious gift of free will, that we might not know how to use it right, and that we might not trust him, he allowed for some chaos to come into our life, I think, to show that he is good and true, to bring glory to him, and to draw us even closer to himself, so that when we come to the end of ourselves, when we're like those who murdered him on the cross, that even then he says, "Father, forgive them." Even when we're a long way off, he is there with open arms, ready to call us all back. He loves each and every one of you so much. So I do encourage any of you, if you have any problems with what I've said today, I didn't even touch on real quick on like evolution and what I think about that. I have a problem with carbon dating. I want to bring up Mount St. Helens and talk about how when that erupted, they took some samples before and it showed them being a normal age. And then afterwards, they were suddenly looking like they were millions of years old. Carbon dating is flawed. Many ways that people do things are flawed. God tells us in his word that he created this world in a mature state. And, there's people who've questioned the validity of the Bible. I dug into that very deeply, and I'd like to talk about that with other people. But from what I can see, the Bible has more original source documents to corroborate each other than any other ancient text that we have. I believe the Iliad is the next closest, and it's like this much supporting it, and the New Testament is like this much. It's far outweighs it, and they're some of them within like 30, 40 years, I believe, of the original events, and written by many different people and corroborated by many different people. The movie Case for Christ is a really good true story about an atheist journalist who set out to prove Christianity wrong. Now he travels the world professing his faith. One thing about atheists that I learned from that movie is many have either been abandoned or abused by their earthly fathers, and that's horrible. But it makes sense that if you felt that pain from your earthly father, you might attribute that to your heavenly Father. And I encourage you to separate people's sin from the sovereignty of our awesome God. And so now I want to encourage any of you to come and talk with me. I'm starting a podcast called Fundamental Questions of Being. I will not be trying to trap you. In fact, I won't even share my beliefs on things unless you ask for them. I just want to hear you and listen to your story and what you believe and why. And maybe I'm way off on everything I've said, and maybe I can learn everything from you, or maybe you can learn some things from me, or vice versa, or whatever. But I think what I want to do is make it kind and warm, and I'm not trying to trap anyone or put you in the hot seat at all. I just want to have a friendly conversation. I believe we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all trying to figure it out. So what better way to do that than to talk and stumble towards the truth together? Simply email hiswitnessmusic@gmail.com, and I will respond, and we can set up a time either in person together or perhaps virtually online. I'm going to be releasing my next single called The Great Unknown, which is all about It took my whole life to write it and to say I'm not afraid of the great unknown, and that love will be our answer for the great unknown. I hope that you'll take some time when I release that to listen to that song. After that, I'm going to be releasing a video about mind-altering substances, and then I'm going to be releasing another single called Keep the Kid. Those songs are already funded. I had started them before I got into these placement battles. So for the time being, I'm going to be focusing my personal finances on trying to bring my children home and keep them, and that takes some money and paying for attorney fees. I'm praying that I can work things out with their moms, who I deeply love and respect, and I want to be partners with them in raising our children. So I don't have any hard feelings against either one of them, and ask them to forgive me for my sins, and I certainly forgive them for any they've committed against me. That being said, if you have any desire to help me finance the other songs that I have, which Keep the Kid and the other ones that I have are much more in the vein of some of the old stuff that our original fans might like, more than kind of the different writing style that I've taken with these other two songs. So I've been inspired with those. They flowed right through me this last year, like the very first recording that I released, Children of the Light. And so I'm hoping to get to those at some point, God willing. It's just a matter of time. Until then, I'm going to keep on with this podcast, and I'm hoping to hear as many of your stories as possible. Thank you so much. And I pray that you and your families are all well. And cling to Christ in these dark times, but trust in him also. Don't worry. Put all your cares on him. Set them at his feet, at the foot of the cross. He paid the price for your sin, and he loves you. And he will leave the 99 for the one every time, because he loves you that much. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.